Well, good morning. So we're going to start by, first of all, going over the schedule. The dementia topic is going to be presented in 7 different sessions spread out during the year. Basically, it's once a month, leaving out months like the summer when I'm traditionally gone a lot, although that could certainly change with my situation. I don't know. I've been having trouble with my right shoulder and swimming, and it's been pretty serious, and I don't know if it's going to stop my swimming or not at this point. But in any case, we'll meet according to a schedule. I've got it all worked out. The next meeting is in March, and in just a few minutes we'll place into your hands the actual schedule. And coming to this topic is part of my life's journey. My first 10 years of ministry, I was in a parachurch ministry where I traveled a lot from church to church, presenting multimedia seminars. It was called Biblical Sight and Sound. And then I finally decided I would go into the pastoral ministry. And then during that period, I got into hospice and was doing hospice as well as the church. And in my hospice work, I got into dementia because it's such a huge need. The community has such a high rate of dementia patients that there are these facilities all over town to take care of them. And I was working in the high desert, and particularly in Yucca Valley, Joshua Tree, and 29 Palms, and I was shocked back then to discover how many people had dementia. I mean, whole institutions full of people, and they're off on side streets and no one even knows about it. And the fact is that that segment is growing. More and more people are coming down with dementia. Well, it's always hard to know exactly. There have been a lot of studies. The basic thing seems to be people are living longer, and that's why more cases are being reported, because it is age-related. Doesn't mean it's caused by age, thank you, but it's age-related. So let's see, could I get you to pass these out to everyone? That would be great, thank you. So we're starting out by looking at at what aging does to the brain. You know by your life experience that you are being impacted by age. There's no escaping it. Now there's that multimillionaire who's spending $3 million a year in trying to stay young and doing all kinds of crazy things. But the fact is he's still aging. He won't be able to escape it. And you feel it every day when you get up in the morning, and the older you get, the more surprises you get. Suddenly a new condition, a new disease, and you go to the doctor and they always tell you the same thing. Well, that's to be expected with aging. So this is kind of a progression. We can't escape it. And it starts, of course, with our brain, and that's where we're going to begin the seminar. And then the next month, we're doing mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is a form of dementia that is not so debilitating. You can live alone independently, having mild cognitive impairment. Then we go to Alzheimer's disease, because Alzheimer's would include about 60 to 80% of people with dementia. They have Alzheimer's. And we'll talk about how hard it is to diagnose. Thank you very much. And then we'll go to medical treatment options and see what is available now, and that has And that's a changing field as well. And we'll look at the pluses and also the minuses. What are the liabilities of medical treatment? Because they exist and they're very real. And you've got to measure those before you embark your loved one on a course of medication. And then what steps can you take to keep your brain healthy? The millionaire is right in his attitude that you can take steps to retard aging, and we certainly want to do that with our brain. And then the next session is information for caregivers, which is really a lot about support and how to maintain yourself if you are a caregiver. And then we're going to look at Alzheimer's disease in California, because we live in California and we want to be aware of what the projected trends are in California. And actually, it's rather frightening. I wrote all of this last summer to try to get ahead of the curve so that I wouldn't be trying to do it month by month like when I first started. It was a struggle. But now it's pretty much under control. I even have next year's written now, so next year's topics. Session 1, the aging brain. What is typical for the aging brain? Well, the brain is really a masterpiece of creation. It's the first computer. It acts exactly like a computer. So when we saw in 1969 or 1970, when we saw the film 2001, and the computer took over the spaceship, and the computer was a brain, well, that's all true. I mean, in terms of what the computer is, the computer is a brain, and so our brain is a computer, and aging affects it, just like it affects every other part of our body. Because when you're getting older and being affected by aging, it isn't just your poor hands with arthritis that are being affected by age, but it's every cell in your body. So it's at the mitochondrial level. It's at the cellular level. The smallest part of you is aging. So I asked my daughter, who is a scientist, and she deals with DNA. She's a researcher. I said to her, well, you know, if you're talking about she's working with ancient DNA right now, trying to recreate the animal. And I said, then this is almost an aging equation, because you're recreating something that's ancient. How can you take something that exists and keep it from aging? And she said to me, well, it could be done, but if it is going to be done, it has to be done with the mitochondria. That's where you start, at the very smallest level. And scientists have no idea of how to do that today. So there is no way that this gentleman, who is spending $3 million a year, is going to stay young. He can retard his aging, because it's been known for years that, for example, if you take regular human growth hormone, that really slows down your aging, but it doesn't eliminate it. You're still going to age, and it's eventually going to catch up with you, because your body is just too complicated and too interdependent to escape aging. Well, number 3, it is normal for aging to affect the brain network. The brain works together. It is a computer. It works together to perform cognitive functions such as learning, thinking, problem solving, and remembering. So there are 2 parts of the brain that are integral to memory: the cerebrum and the limbic system. Now, the cerebrum is the big lobes. We have the right side and the left side of the brain, the big hemispheres, and those hemispheres have 4 lobes, and each lobe has a different function. And the temporal lobe is a lobe that contains memory. Memory is generally the factor that first shows up. How can you tell if someone is coming down with dementia, it'll come in the form of memory, 99% of the time. And it comes, just suddenly. You may not notice it at first. The patient will not notice it at all. But you, as the loved one, you may see that in your parent or in your spouse. And the tip-off comes when the question is asked, and then 2 minutes later, the question is asked again, and again, and again, and again, way beyond normal. And you realize then that dementia is setting in. Well, that dementia comes not like turning a switch, but as a process, and it is a one-way process. The person progresses more and more into the dementia as the brain is affected. But there are other parts of the brain, the limbic system, which is a network of small structures that host memory and emotions, like the hippocampus. It's kind of the machine that sorts the neurons that carry different information. And that can be affected as well. Number 4, it is normal for aging to affect cognitive processes. People in their 50s and 60s may notice that they're not as mentally sharp as they used to be. And that's because the neurons, which really are the gasoline that provides the fuel for the neurons to move in the brain, it runs out. And the neurons don't move as well as they did. Now, what is normal? Well, number 5, it's normal for aging to affect response time. And we've known that for years, that older people don't respond to stimuli as well, as quickly as young people. So a young person who's being tested as a pilot in one of these fancy machines, he's going to react much faster than an older person would. It's generally understood that the response time of an older adult is about 1.5 times slower than that of a younger adult. So why should us who are over 60 drive slower? Because our response time is slower. That's a very good reason. One thing that you learn about driving, and I've been driving since I was 16, so that's almost 70 years, is the faster you drive, the faster things happen. And sometimes it's good to go slow. I mean, here's Pastor John driving to church a couple weeks ago, and someone goes right through a red light. And, you're kind of helpless. So, yes, it pays to drive slow. So don't be ashamed if your grandkids are ribbing you because you drive so slow. That's good. And number 6, it's normal for aging to affect speech and certain executive functions. For example, I suffer from age-related aphasia, and I do. Age-related aphasia simply means that aphasia, the inability to choose a word, to find the word to say, that it's related to my age. It's not related to dementia. And the reason I know that is because with age-related aphasia, I will think of the word. Just relax. Give it a minute or 2 or 5, and boop, there it is. But with dementia, that never happens. You can't think of the word, and you can't think of the word. Executive functions of the brain are adapting to new situations, solving complex problems, learning new things. Executive functions, that's like the brain when it's in its sorting mode and it sorts things. It doesn't sort very well. It's normal for aging to cause memory lapse. And for many years I worked all these jobs, and I never had a day off except for vacation. But during the year, it was just go, 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 go. And one day I drove down to San Bernardino, and I got down on Waterman Avenue, and I couldn't remember why I went down there. And it really frightened me. I thought, oh my goodness, do I have dementia? Because I was working with dementia patients. And so I made an appointment with my doctor, and I explained it to him. And at that time, we didn't have televisits or anything like that. You had to go and see your doctor. Couldn't even call him up. And he patiently explained to me, when he heard what happened, that if I was worried about having dementia, I didn't have it. Simple as that. If you think you have dementia, you don't. So that relieved my mind, and here I am. I'm more than 20 years later, still fine. But aging affects your memory, and you can become, scatterbrained. And it's fine when you're maybe 20 to be doing, or 30 to doing lots of things at once, like in a busy office environment where you have to answer the phone, wait on customers, and do something else. But it doesn't work so well when in your 60s. Number 8, it's normal for aging to affect memory. Well, there are lots of different kinds of memory, and I've got them listed here. Episodic memory, that's when you remember an episode. I'm sure that Pastor John will never forget being whammed by that car. 50 years ago, I was driving on the freeway and someone fell asleep and they rammed me from the rear. I still remember that. And it's something I'll never forget. And then there's semantic memory, like trying to remember people's names. And I don't do that very well, never have. Procedural memory, how to do certain things. And for example, if you're working in a technical field like you're an RN, you better have pretty good procedural memory. Working memory, memory storing information, and that's the memory we use the most. We use it every day. Oh, I remember I had lunch. I remember that I took my medicine. That's working memory. And the interesting thing is that normal aging can affect any of the above, but dementia almost always begins with working memory. So that means it's noticeable to other people. So it brings us to a question that I don't really have listed here, but one that we ought to think about, is that when your loved one shows signs of dementia, what do you do? Well, I can tell you some things not to do, at least. Number one is don't lose patience with them. You can't allow yourself ever to lose patience. The minute that your loved one exhibits the first signs of dementia, you lose the right to be impatient with them. You cannot do it. You just can't allow it. You have to answer the question as patiently as you did the first time that it was asked, even though it might be the 8th time in 8 minutes. You continue to answer the question. You just have to be patient. And then you have to decide, are you going to tell your loved one of what you perceive? And you have to consider the ramifications if you do that. If they know that they've got dementia, what is that going to do to their level of being anxious? Because being anxious is one of the huge parameters in dementia. The more anxious the dementia patient is, the worse off they are. Or is knowing it's something that you think they would want to know? Now, if your spouse has already announced to you when he or she was healthy that if I ever get dementia, I want you to help me kill myself, I think that pretty much determines your response or what it should be. I think there's a time and a cause and a reason for keeping things quiet and not saying, not disclosing, but just being a helpful presence, a loving, kind, helpful, patient person there, a companion just like you've always been. Because after all, when it's your spouse, the wedding vows say, until death do us part. It doesn't say until our sound minds leave us. And so it's our duty to stay and do that. I know a young firefighter, 27 years old. He was diagnosed with cancer. It was all through him. They opened him up at the City of Hope, took out 27 tumors all the way down through his chest cavity. 27 tumors. Had 2 young boys, 2 and 4. And his wife left him the first week because she said that she didn't want to be married to an invalid. Oh my. What happened to the marriage vows? So for those of us who value our marriage vows, we are committed to our spouse, and we're going to do the very best thing that is possible for them. And it's up to us with our family to sit down and talk and figure out, well, what is the best thing? And telling them, might not. I'm not telling you not to tell them. I'm telling you we need to raise the question of what is the best for the patient. So number 9, what is dementia? Well, it's an umbrella term. It includes all kinds of diseases that uproot the process of the mind. When I wrote this, I didn't realize how many there are. Now I have counted over 20 diseases that can cause dementia. Mostly, however, we have dementia that is unattributable. We don't know why. They don't have Lewy body's disease or something else. They're otherwise healthy, but their mind is gone. And so those cases we generally say we put under the category of Alzheimer's. Now, Dr. Alzheimer was a German physician working just as 1900 came into play. From 1900 to about 1914, he did a lot of research on patients of his that had dementia, and they couldn't figure out why. So they ended up naming this condition after him. So Alzheimer's then is kind of an unattributable dementia. We don't know why, but there it is. And it can be diagnosed officially upon death with an autopsy. The brain has to be opened in order to do that. But, it doesn't matter whether you call it Alzheimer's or what it is. The big problem is that the mind is so deeply affected. So dementia is caused by disease and not a normal part of aging. And that's why there are some people who can carry on to be 100 and be mentally sharp. And I have personally known people like that. I knew a man who died finally at 104, mentally sharp, right to the end. But of course his body was being ravaged by old age. And just parenthetically, I might say his wife lived to be 102. And he predeceased her by about a year. And she told me through her tears then, as she grieved for him, that it wasn't long enough. And they were married 80 years. Can you imagine that? So that's what you call a long life. So dementia then, number 10, it's not a specific disease. It's a condition. It's a collection of symptoms that result in the inability of the brain to function well enough for the person to live independently. And that's kind of the key phrase, for the person to live independently. So you can live at home and be like Mrs. Carter, the wacky lady who had 42 cats. And she was a bit wacky, but she had the skills, the life skills, to live at home independently. So you can't really say that, there was a dementia that, any dementia that we would know. But dementia people often have no short-term memory. They lose their ability to solve problems, and they may experience personality changes and behavioral and emotional problems, which may include agitation, delusion, and hallucinations. So if you want to really have a diagnosis of dementia, you have to have 2 of those things. memory loss, maybe spatial loss, inability to know where you are or where anything is. I mean, how about this? The lady with dementia has eaten granola cereal for the last 60 years, and now she doesn't know where it is, but it's been in the same cupboard for 60 years. She doesn't know. Well, it's memory loss, spatial loss, inability of executive function. She can't handle any details of life, anything new, any changes. It's just beyond her. So then we would say she has dementia. Number 12, a fundamental concept. Symptoms of dementia often go beyond memory loss. Oh, and I already covered that. Types of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is by far the most common, causing 60 to 80% of dementia. And that percentage depends on whose report you read. The American Alzheimer's Association says it's closer to 80% than it is to 60. Here are the diseases and symptoms here are just some of the diseases I've discovered. There's mild cognitive impairment that we'll talk about next week, because that's a big one and yet one that a person can live independently with. Vascular dementia, young onset dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, AIDS dementia complex, Huntington's disease with dementia, multiple sclerosis with dementia, Parkinson's disease with dementia, chronic traumatic brain injury with dementia, Down syndrome with dementia, posterior cortical atrophy, and it goes on and on. And it is true that there are some patients who have more than one kind of dementia. And that's a real complicated kind of dementia. So what does dementia look like in daily life? I mean, if you just bring up the term, a person who's not familiar with it, especially a younger person, would think that of a lunatic asylum then, right? Of a lunatic. Now, I once visited a lunatic asylum, and when I got out of the taxi, the taxi driver warned me. He said, go right into the office. Now, this was, I was 20. It was 60 years ago. And I got out of the taxi, and sure enough, over there's a tree, and behind the tree there was this madman peeking around looking at me. Well, that's what a lot of people think of dementia. But dementia, as we have it afflicting our world today, is just a mental incapacity for someone to live, a mental dysfunction that means a person can't live independently. They can't function normally. And then under 14, you can read what one man said when he figured out that his wife had dementia. Number 15, attention deficit. When you're speaking with a dementia patient, they do have an attention deficit. They might not be hearing a word you're saying. And if you really want to talk to them, you got to get right up in their face. Listen to me now. Hear me. Because otherwise they can't focus on it. Executive function deficit, that we've already covered. Confusion with spatial relationships. Unable to find the way home even after living there for 50 years. Wandering is a big problem. Oh, a big problem. Because your loved one just takes off. And they don't know why. They don't know what they're looking for. And as one dementia patient recently said when she was found, where'd everybody go? Number 18, unable to manage time or effort. They can't do any kind of tasks because they're unable to manage tasks. You know, when you get up in the morning, at whatever age you are or were, you laid out in your mind what you were going to do that day. I mean, even if you didn't punch a time clock, maybe you were a homemaker, you still laid out what you were going to do. Well, let's see, I've got to do the laundry. And that's the way we are as humans. But a dementia patient is unable to do that. They have no concept of time. They have no concept of what has to be done. So if you're living with a dementia patient, you watch what they're doing, and if they go to do the laundry, you remember that, because otherwise the laundry will sit there wet in the washing machine for a week and be all mildewed because they've forgotten about it. They don't know. So you take up the slack and you look for those kinds of things. And that's normal. That's a normal dementia patient. So a dementia patient can often, at least in the early stages, well, let's make it even in the middle stages of dementia, can carry on a conversation, can talk about the weather, and you wouldn't really know that they had dementia unless you're around them enough. And then they start asking the same question over and over again, or compensating in some other way. Dementia people compensate, and they don't even know they're doing it. I think it's a human habit, a human learned thing to do. That if you can't think up something that you should know, like what's your phone number? Oh, they'll start whistling, or they'll tell a joke, something to get themselves off of the fact that they don't know their phone number. Have you ever forgotten your phone number? I did once. Had the same phone number for 20 years and couldn't remember it. And I was a young man. So yeah, we can forget anything, but it comes back. But for dementia people, it doesn't come back, it stays away. So struggles with language, number 19, that happens towards the end of the disease. The average lifespan of a dementia patient in the United States caused by any disease, from first symptom to death, is just about 8 years, depending on what study you read. Now, there are exceptions to that. In working in hospice, I saw patients who went down in a year, just a year. And I saw other patients who clearly were going to make it to 20 years. So we can have dementia in the latter years of life that won't alter our lifespan, actually. So if you don't get dementia until you're 80, you're probably can have the same lifespan anyway. But it does affect lifespan if you get it young enough. Number 20, difficulty recognizing that which is familiar. It's called agnosia, and the patient is unable to recognize familiar people or objects or places. And that can be really upsetting when the daughter arrives and mother doesn't know her. And my grandmother got dementia from a burst appendix, and she was institutionalized because back in that day, around 1930, it had been in the 1920s, more than 100 years ago, having dementia was a terrible mark on the family. And so you hid it. You didn't tell anyone. So you immediately removed the person to an institution. And my mother, who was only 8, then was motherless. My mother took the train as an 8-year-old for an hour and a half. She lived far away. This was in Iowa. And she would go and visit her. And her mother would say to her, "Oh, you know, I have a little girl just about your age at home." And my mother would say, "That's me, that's me." And she couldn't recognize her. And that was something that affected my mother deeply. She never got over it. Number 21 is a difficult one, personality change. Personality change almost always accompanies dementia. You can just count on it. And the problem is that in the majority of these personality changes, the majority are for the worse. No, I have the worst. I don't think that's right. I think of the worst as a sausage in Germany. But anyway, the changes are the worst possible. And it's so bad that, men tend to be stronger than women, even in old age. And you can have this old guy who's 90 who maybe went to the gym all his life and he's strong as a horse. And boy, he gets agitated and now he's upset all the time and his wife can't handle him. He could really hurt her. He has to be institutionalized. And in my experience as a hospice chaplain, and I visited dementia patients in institutions and at home, wherever they were, the majority of men institutionalized for dementia are there because of this factor. They had personality change and they became mean. Now, there's a small percentage of patients, and it doesn't matter if you're male or female, there's a small cohort that get nicer. They get sweeter. And that's not a bad deal. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? It's something to see, to experience. And it's kind of like well, it's just wonderful. It's like a moment of grace. All right, now, what questions do you have? Comments, discussion about dementia? Some of you perhaps are struggling with this issue either in family or friends or yourself. Yes.
Should I?
You should.
Nobody's here to move the mic for you?
No, but I'm still young.
I know you are. Oh, here she comes.
Talk in that one, that's fine.
Talk on that one.
All right, all right. Yes. 10 years ago, my wife reached a point in decline that I had already decided when she gets this way, I'll have to send her somewhere. And okay, so we did that, and she was going to enter Westminster. No, see, I can't. I did the Mission Commons. A doctor had to fill out something for her to be in, I think it was, never mind. So this doctor filled this out and it said diagnosis. And he wrote down one word, dementia, which was something of a surprise for me because I didn't know the parameters. Okay, so she stayed about 5-6 years. The facility came under some lawyers with a new higher level, and they looked for everyone who was defined as dementia, 3 or 4 people in assisted living at that time. And the view was if the person has dementia, they could wander outside of the facility. Now you're going to get sued for something. So she had to be hustled quickly to what's now called euphemistically a memory care facility, and by the way, costs more.
Oh, yeah.
And so she was moved there, although in 8 years she had never tried to leave, and she could have walked out, walked out any time. So, the lawyers want a line that they're safe on. But I don't. Do you want to comment on that? Or?
Sure. Well, at that time, there was a change in state law that required that. Mm-hmm. And that change came about because I think it was a case in Fresno where a lady wandered and got hit by a car and was killed. And she had never wandered before, and the facility was sued. So the state law came into act. So yes, and memory care does cost more. But as far as wandering goes, if anyone has dementia, they could wander. And even though they only do it once, they could do it. And it's just unpredictable. And I would not be able to, for example, to place a family member in, if they had dementia, in a regular facility. I'd be too afraid. So I would insist on memory care. Yes, it costs more. And is that fair? I don't know. Any kind of custodial care is shocking to us who don't have it, right? But then, having worked in facilities for so many years and seeing all the wheels that turn, all the expenses that go on, I can understand that it costs a lot. But yeah, I mean, when I was doing the facilities up in the high desert, $5,000 a month was pretty cheap, actually, and for memory care. And then I transferred down to Palm Desert, and I worked there 5 years. Palm Springs, Palm Desert, La Quinta, and there it was $25,000 a month. But the facilities were luxurious with movie theaters and bowling alleys, and there's no comparison of the two. But still, it costs a lot. So for those of us who are older, then it behooves us to be hedging our bets against having to pay that. I mean, there's two ways to do it. One is lose everything and go on Medi-Cal. The other one would be to pay it yourself. So I've had to structure our finances so that I could reach funds if that ever came into being, where I had to have a loved one in care, memory care or regular care. I mean, so I'm prepared for that. I hope it doesn't happen. And then if they ever live long enough to exhaust the money, then I could go on Medi-Cal and have the same service, but I wouldn't be paying for it. But I hate to have that happen. Wouldn't it be nice if all of us who are aging, if we could pass on some assets to our children? That would be nice, because that's a hand up I never had. When Barbara and I got married, we were both dirt poor, and we furnished our house by going to garage sales. And the style of furniture we used was early Truman, and free couch and free chairs and free rug, and just that's what we did. But it would be nice, and I'm not saying that that's a big goal in life, but I think I'd rather do that than spend it by giving it to the institution to take care of my wife. And then also, your comment about there was you made a line there, and once you crossed that line, you knew you had to. That's individual. We all set that line, and that's determined by circumstances, by our loved one, by us, by our circumstances, and you figure that out for yourself with the help of your family. What is the line? And because you really need to think about that, because there comes a point, if you're taking care of your loved one at home, there comes a point where you'll collapse under the load if you don't. So you have to pre-think that. I just last week I went to Courtner's, and I got my final arrangements finally done and paid for. It's all paid for. Boy, that was nice to get that done. I couldn't believe what a nice feeling I had when I left there. I felt really good about it. But when it comes to the money you leave, that's a minor thing compared to the care that you want to give to your loved one. Yes. Oh, wait a moment. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think you touched on it briefly, destigmatizing the fact that you may have to put your spouse in a safe, secure location. I had to face that. I still am not over the guilt, because I promised I would take care of him all of his life. Yeah. But he stopped sleeping.
Yeah.
And he had to be watched 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And for me, living in a house with an adult 3-year-old, everything had to be locked up. All the doors I had cameras in the room, I had alarms on doors and windows, and I couldn't I couldn't survive and watch him at the same time. So he needed to be safe.
Exactly.
And I found a place I thought he would be safe.
You did the right thing. And here's how you deal with your guilt. Next week, here at 2 o'clock on campus, we have a support group that's for caregivers. And you can go to that support group, and you won't believe how helpful that will be to you in unloading your guilt. Because what people who have never been in that situation don't realize is that there comes a point when you just can't go on. You just can't do it. And Robert is absolutely right here. You pre-think that, set the line, so when the day comes, you don't have quite as much guilt. You'll still have guilt, but again, the group setting and the group sharing with other caregivers, oh boy, does that ever help deal with that. Thank you for sharing.
Going back to the personality changes, so it's not common for women with dementia to be aggressive and combative, or it's just that they're typically not strong enough, and so it's not a concern, or
It's not a gender issue. It's an individualized issue. So gender doesn't really play a part. What seems to matter is what you just brought up, how strong the person is. Now, if you have an 85-year-old man who never exercises or never did anything to build up muscle mass, probably it's not a big issue. But you'd be surprised how strong some of these old guys are. I mean, I see them down at the Y, and they're still pumping iron. I think, wow, I don't want to get on the bad side of that guy. And he's 85, so it's rare, but it can happen. Any other issues, comments? Well, I want to thank you for coming, and we'll see you then in July when we'll talk about the mild cognitive impairment. In March, unless, of course, we forget